Welcome back to another episode of the Livelong Podcast, where we explore science-backed strategies for a longer, healthier life. I'm your host, Britt Chester, and I'm excited to share my conversation this week with Dr. Vonda Wright, a leading longevity expert, orthopedic surgeon, and sports doctor. We discuss muscle mass, bone density, diet and nutrition, and how chronic exercise really might be one of the best ways to have a healthier, happier tomorrow. And a quick note before our conversation, March 29th, 2025, Livelong on Palm Beach Island, an exclusive 200-person only longevity event. More to come on that later, but for now, here's my conversation with Dr. Vonda Wright. First, what did you have for breakfast this morning, and why did you choose that?
Every morning, I eat the same thing because to me, mostly food is fuel. So it's an omelet made with 1 cup of egg whites, because that will give me nearly 30 grams of protein. Now, the question I always get with that is, what's wrong? What do you have against egg yolks? What's wrong with egg yolks? There's actually nothing wrong with egg yolks. However, they pack 4 grams of fat. And so I would rather get my fat from an avocado. So I then eat either a half of an avocado, sometimes a whole, depending on the size, because that is packed with good fat and protein and fiber. And with that, I have found, because you can't see it, I have a coat on, but I wear a CGM, not because I'm diabetic, because I'm addicted to my own data. I know that I need some complex carbs in the morning to keep my energy level up, because when I go into my clinic where I am now, my orthopedic clinic, it's not like running a race, but it is an endurance exercise. So I need about 60 grams and I eat sourdough bread that I make myself. So 60 grams of complex carbs. So that every morning gives me about 500 calories. It gives me 30 grams of protein. It gives me some fiber.
Was there ever a time where you had a different sort of regimen and meal in the morning, something that fueled you a little bit differently? And has that shifted as you have aged and noticed a difference in how your energy is being fueled?
Well, it definitely has changed over my lifespan. It has changed not only in terms of, did breakfast exist? What's the content of breakfast? And the energy I need. And so when I was 40, and I was ramping up my orthopedic practice, I was the head football doctor for the University of Pittsburgh. I had a brand new baby. I was lucky to run out the door with a cup of coffee and a box of Cheerios in my car that I ate on the way to work, right? I mean, I'm just trying to survive here. And yet at 40, I would say I was in the best shape of my life, even though I was eating terribly, right? So as I self-educated, aged about almost 20 years, not quite 20 years, but aged and realized that if I want to increase my health span as I increase my lifespan, I have to be conscientious. And the thing is, I'm an elite sports doctor. I'm a sports surgeon. So I know exactly how we treat pro athletes. And all I'm doing is treating myself with the same principles that we treat some of our highest functioning people. So yes, it has changed. Even recently, however, I have found that what I just said to you is what I eat works best for me. Does that mean that I sometimes don't have a bowl of steel cut oats with almonds and blueberries? Yes, I do, because I frankly love steel cut oats. Or that on a given Saturday morning, I'll go out with my family and I'll have the average diner breakfast, But I got to tell you for sure, diners are now used to people like me asking that instead of home fries, I ask for a salad. And it's no longer weird to them. Enough of us are asking.
I want to ask, what does longevity mean to you now? And has that definition sort of changed as you've gotten older? Has your focus on exercise, food choices, and how you're mixing all of that changed? What does longevity mean to you, and when did that really start kind of becoming that North Star for your decisions?
Well, I think if we go back to the beginning of my career, I am so glad that the national zeitgeist has caught up with what I and a few of us were screaming from the mountaintops as early as 2000. Because at that time, people were like, yeah, they weren't listening. And yet my research has always been in musculoskeletal aging based on the fact that, and in fact, the mantra for my entire career, as you set out on a career, like, what am I going to do in this career? Well, even though I'm an orthopedic sports surgeon, my mantra has always been, I am going to change the way we age in this country. It's never changed. But how I've done it is changed my approaches to people, which I'll tell you about. But I have never believed, ever, for one instant in my life, that aging is an inevitable decline from the vitality of youth down a slippery slope to frailty, and that there was nothing we could do about it. In fact, I have very early personal examples in my life how in one generation of my own family, my grandparents, who were farmers in Kansas, died in their early 60s because they just did what they were doing, eating all kinds of fat and terrible food and smoking and all the things that happened at that time. But then within my own family, my own father, their youngest child, has been an endurance athlete his entire life. And while he grew up on the same crappy food that they did, it was the intervention of lifelong fitness and great muscle mass. He's currently 85 and still goes out and does 3 to 5 miles a day. So I'm just hoping now that I can live another 40 years until I'm at least 97 so that I can bug the hell out of my children, right? So my viewpoint has never changed. My methods have changed.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like there's a lot of, I mean, that's different for everyone, right? I mean, in this individualized care, there's a lot of guiding principles that seem very much the same, but for everyone's endurance, for everyone's overall health, a lot of those factors are going to be slightly different. I do a lot of cycling myself, and I always joke, I've entered these long races, these century rides, 120 miles, and there would be, I'm grinding up a hill, sweating as much as possible, and I get passed by a 90-year-old woman who
That's
is
right.
just... who is just, heartbeat at probably 110, living in that zone 2
Yep.
world.
Yep.
And I'm doing this today so that I can do that tomorrow. That's like what I just keep telling myself. So kind of on that, you said that your mission has never changed, but a lot of other things have changed, both in research and both in studies. So what breakthroughs have you been most excited about in the last, I don't want to go back too far because I imagine there are a lot. So let's say 10 years. So what breakthroughs in perhaps orthopedic medicine, joint health, and aging have got you really excited and actually moved the needle for your practice?
Well, I'll briefly describe for you some of the work we did in looking at musculoskeletal aging. I had both a stem cell lab, the lab that not only pipetted stem cells, but applied it into clinical practice with several great PhDs who deserve a lot of credit. But what we found were, through a series of studies, were several things. Number one, if we use physical performance in racing, I study track and field athletes over 40, as a biomarker of aging, we answered the question, how old are we when we really start to slow down? And the answer, if you ask Hallmark, is 40. Or 50 at most, right? Rest in peace. And I have to tell you, they're making that up, because in our studies of chronically active, non-professional athletes, we found that we do not significantly slow down until we're in our mid-70s. And if we do slow down before that, it's due to injury, it's due to lack of will, it's due to some accumulating factors. So we shouldn't count ourselves out or say, oh, I'm just getting old, because our research shows that you're just copping out, number one. Number two, we published this study in 2011, which has become iconic on the internet. It has its own life. It is now posted up there. I see it every day without reference to those of us who actually did the study. It's the study that showed that chronic exercise in recreational type athletes can preserve lean muscle mass. And in the picture, you may have seen it, I post a picture of an MRI of the thigh of a 40-year-old triathlete.
I've seen this.
Yes. I post it next to somebody who sat around at their desk for 35 years, and we go from flank steak to rump roast. But what happens if we invest in our mobility every day for 35 years is we retain our muscle mass, we retain our strength, and we do not become grossly infiltrated like a Kobe beef. So that picture, which you've seen, came out of our labs, right? So we proved we can retain performance, muscle. We did 2 studies that show that chronic exercise can retain bone density because, listen, let's get into this later, but we're 1 fall away from death. And then finally, we did a final study that looked at the role of chronic exercise in brain function and found that we were able to retain the executive function, the part that makes us human, of our brain by being active every day. And so those studies put together really reinforced for me the idea that we had more control over our aging and longevity, and that we are not just victims of the passage of time. You will hear me say this a lot, no matter whoever will listen to me, because I think there's this sometimes feeling of inevitability that we have to age like we maybe saw our grandparents do. But because of the work you're in, most of our aging and longevity is not predestined by our genetics because of epigenetics. We can change the very transcription of our genes to the tune of 9,800 per exercise session. I mean, we're so in control.
And it seems like there's a lot of factors with that. And I guess that brings me to my next question. What recent findings with cellular aging and perhaps inflammation do you feel are transforming our approach to health? I mean, is there new data? Is there new information just about that you think are really transforming how we're attacking this?
I think within the last few years, it's become common knowledge that the food we eat predestines how our body responds. I think that at a very mitochondrial level, where we have gained knowledge of the fact that moving is not just exercise. Moving changes the way that we feed glucose into our little mitochondria that live within our muscle cells, and we're beginning to understand in the public, really. I mean, scientists have known it forever, but within the public, that simple things like going for a 20-minute walk after your largest meal pumps the glucose into our muscles so the mitochondria can use it, and also an understanding that mitochondria work at a steady state. Just because you eat more does not mean that they're going to work faster. And therefore, right, they plod along at their own metabolic rate, converting fuel into ATP. And the body has to work at it.
Let me stop you right there. What is ATP? I'm sorry.
Adenosine triphosphate is the currency of energy in our bodies. All fuel, whether it's fat, you think of the 3 macros: protein, fat, carbohydrates, are broken down into their simplest form and used by the mitochondria as fuel for this Krebs cycle, which do not make me recite that. I don't remember it from medical school.
I'll share the notes. I'll share it in the show notes.
Listen. And to churn out ATP, which is the energy, and each of those substrates gives us a different amount. But the true understanding that what we eat, the rate we eat it, what we do after we eat, all matters in terms of our metabolic health. The other thing that I think is fascinating in terms of longevity, so of the 13 hallmarks of aging, I've chosen 4 to 6 to really focus on that we can change the most with our lifestyle. Those being inflammation, which you talked about, mitochondrial health. But one that I'm fascinated with, and the work I'm most familiar with, is the work of Dr. Johnny Huard, who is a scientist I've worked with for more than 20 years in Vail, is cellular senescence. So for your audience who haven't heard a lot about that, in our bodies, cells, literally cells, have 4 destinations. Number 1, they can be pluripotent stem cells, which means they're born with you. They can become anything. They stay ever young, if you will, and regenerative. Those are then stimulated to become your mature cells, your bone, your muscle, your brain. And those cells do their jobs. They continue to divide until they accumulate so much damage in the normal process of working hard and living, wear and tear, if you will, that what they need to do is then turn on programmed cell death or apoptosis, because a cell death is an active process. It's not just you slowly die off. You turn on the genes to die. But in the middle of this, between stem cell, mature cell, and dying cell, we have a population of cells called senescent cells, or in the lay press, we call them zombie cells. They're neither living nor dying. They are so damaged that they can't turn off, and they just circulate around our body, spewing off cytokines that can lead to rapid aging and cancer. So something I'm really fascinated by is getting rid of senescent cells in our body, either through exercise, through supplements.
How do you burn that? How do you burn a senescent cell? How do you get rid of these zombies?
Yeah, you do a few things. You invest in your mobility every day so that you are metabolically most healthy, number one. Number two, there are supplements that really come from food, like fisetin and quercetin, which are known in the laboratory to decrease senescent cell load. And that's something I love in the work of Dr. Huard, is that he can document the decrease of senescent cell load based on lifestyle changes and things like fisetin, which I take every day, trying to optimize my microenvironment in my body to do the best work.
Mm-hmm. What foods contain those ficetins, or what is something that if I'm going to the store and I would be getting broccoli and cucumbers, what should I be adding to my recipe list?
Well, I'm going to answer that two ways. Number one, I like diets filled with green, leafy, brightly colored vegetables, nothing turquoise or fuchsia in a package, because nature in general does not have that kind of food dye. But green, leafy, and protein, right? So in a diet, that's what I want you to go for. But just like you would have to drink 7,000 bottles of Pinot Noir to get enough resveratrol, you'd have to eat a field of strawberries to get enough fisetin. And so generally we do supplement with that. And there's a growing body of literature for the purists, the evidence-based people, which I am, and I'm an academic surgeon. We have a growing amount of data. For the evidence influenced, like most of the longevity community, we've got enough proof we're going to take the stuff. So either way, we're getting to a place where we recognize that nature has surrounded us by so many amazing molecules that can help us age longer, better.
Where do you see carbohydrates, perhaps starchy ones, potatoes, things like that, fitting into a diet regimen?
So I think we have to remember that every person needs to be treated individually. So I'm going to say some general things, but then high-performing athletes, or even active people, active recreational athletes, are very different from your average citizen, mostly sedentary, doing 1 hour a day person, right? So for the high-level athletes, we are counting every calorie. We are preparing their food. We are looking at their recovery and their cortisol levels. So that cannot be generalized. But simple carbs are fast fuel, right? If you, in that situation, you need it. Even active people, I would consider myself that, active people, we need some carbs. But what we need is, when we're in the heat of a physical battle, if you will, in the heat of my last Spartan race, I need to refuel with some faster absorbing carbs. But on a daily basis, we should be focused on fiber-filled carbs, not simple sugar, of which Americans eat 16 pounds a month, which will kill us. Protein glycolation is a real thing. But complex carbs, which takes our body some time and energy to digest, like the fibrous carbs that come from northern white beans, or avocados,
Hmm.
or stringy sweet potatoes, or, if you want to supplement, corn husk psyllium. I mean, fiber is an amazing carb, and it's also good for our gut microbiome, and it's
Yeah.
not fast absorbed, right? There is a reason. Think of this. I like to use this example. You can build muscle by only eating vegetables, but it takes more to get the fiber and protein in, right? So, I mean,
Hmm.
cows have 4 stomachs because it takes a lot to digest all that fiber, right? But it
Hmm.
can be done, and you can build muscle and fuel your activity with it.
How do you see the future of healthy aging as well as educating everyone? Dr. Wright, you get in front of a lot of people. You
Hmm.
are on a lot of podcasts. You are
Hmm.
on ours.
Yes.
You are on our stage. You host a podcast.
Yes.
So you are getting in front of so many people. How do we educate, and how do you kind of see that future unfolding?
Um, well, let's talk about that. I love that question. I'm going to give you the answer. So as we're looking towards the future and looking at how to be as healthy as we can for as long as we can, and to die quietly in our sleep like Queen Elizabeth, right? She saw the prime minister on Tuesday, died in her sleep on Thursday at 90 something.
Hmm.
That is a good way. So how do we do that? Well, number one, listen, let's start with our brains. I believe we must pivot our mindset. Instead of looking over, I always look over my left shoulder. Instead of looking over our shoulder and saying, oh my God, it was so great to be 25. It was great to be 25 because it was so frigging easy, right? Everything was easy. I could work all night, I could play all day, or vice versa. But here's the deal. We had not yet come into the wisdom of our age. Maybe people were further along than I was, but I did not truly know myself well enough to be so authentic that there's only one Vonda Wright right now. At 25, there was the sporty Vonda. There was the academic Vonda. There was the Vonda trying to please her boyfriend at the time. There is one authentic person now, which comes with a peace that allows me to harness the wisdom of my age. I know I can fix anything because I have had enough life experience to do so. So we can remember 25, but we need to pivot. If we are truly going to go forward and live our best life the longest, to understanding that at 39 or 37 or 57, the best can still yet to come. And it's a true mindset change. Because if we're looking backwards, we cannot be the best we can going forward. So that's number one, mindset pivot.
Hmm.
Number two, we need to build a lifestyle, right? It's all the things that I normally talk about. We need to be focused on, I have an acronym for everything. In building a lifestyle, let's build a lifestyle that includes activity with flexibility and agility, with aerobic training that's not all burning ourselves out. I prescribe an 80-20 method. 80% of the time we're in base training, 20% of the time we're sprinting our guts out, right? That's how our body responds.
What do you mean by base training? I just want to make sure. By base training, where are we? Is that 40% of exertion? Is that 10% heart rate zones?
Yeah,
What should we
it's
look at that?
about 65, but at where I am in Florida, I have the benefit of a metabolic lab, so we can measure based on your lactate threshold, knowing where your lactate fat max is, where you are
Hmm.
metabolically most efficient, burning fat before we flip to carbohydrates and start producing a lot of lactic acid. For most people, that's about 65% of your maximum heart rate. And we spend 80% of our time there because that then will build a cardiovascular base for everything else. And the other 20% of the time, we're sprinting, which does not mean have to be on a track or a treadmill. It can be any apparatus, but we're working at our maximum heart rate for only
Hmm.
30 seconds at a time, and then we
Hmm.
completely recover. So that then we do have to lift heavy weights. I'm a big component of getting people um, under some bars and lifting low reps, high weight. And then finally, we cannot forget in our building a lifestyle to be worried about our balance and agility because, like I said, we are one fall away from disaster. So that's the changing our mindset, building our active lifestyle. We've already talked about our nutrition a lot. The final thing I want, especially women, to be aware of is their hormone future, right? So we know that starting at age 40-ish, sometimes less, sometimes more, we have a rapid decline in our production of estradiol because at that point we have less than 1% of our eggs left. We're born with all the eggs we're ever going to have. And every month we spew them out. And it is the ovulation that helps us produce enough estrogen for everything. There is an estrogen receptor on every tissue in our body. And so I frequently say that in my mind, estradiol is the elixir of longevity for women, because without it, and this is the musculoskeletal syndrome of menopause paper that we published, if we just stick to the musculoskeletal system, not to mention our heart, our brain, with estrogen, we can retain muscle mass. We can retain bone density. We can prevent rapid onset of arthritis. We can uninflame our body. Estrogen is a huge anti-inflammatory. And so if we want to live without total body pain, which is called arthralgia, if we want to live without frozen shoulder where we can't raise our arm or hook our bras, or if we want to retain our muscle mass so that we do not become one in the 3 frail people who must enter a nursing home in this country, right? Or do not want to be one fall away from death, then we need to focus on all these things I had just talked about, but especially our hormone health. And it's not just for women. Men lose their testosterone and don't even know it, right? They're like, I'm good, until they start coming into my orthopedic office with multiple tendon injuries or feelings of malaise and weakness. So for men, I encourage my sons to do this. I think every man should have their testosterone checked when they're in their 30s to know what we're going to supplement up to when you get to be 50 or 60 and feel kind of low. You may, at 60, have a testosterone of 400, which is technically normal, but in your 20s, you may have had a testosterone of 600 or 800, which is your normal, right?
Right.
So it's not just a message for women, which I am all over the place talking about the elixir of longevity for women, but also for men. But can I just say one more thing? I mean, I could obviously talk to you forever. I am also out to change the narrative of longevity, because here's what I see in the public. Not with you guys, not with us, but in the public. When you talk about longevity and you talk about men living longer, what it looks like is the GQ spread of George Clooney and Brad Pitt in the south of France celebrating his 60th birthday, which was as cool and as dynamic and amazing as I could ever think of. What does aging look like? It looks like that. That is not the story that's being told for women. For women, living longer is not framed in longevity in society. It is framed as anti-aging, which I resent. Could we please let women age strong, powerfully, and in my words, and my new book is called Unbreakable, both physically and mentally. If we can train to live longer, we will live better and use longevity for both men and women.
Thanks for tuning in to part 1 of my conversation with Dr. Vonda Wright. In part 2, we talk about musculoskeletal syndrome of menopause, women's health, and even more longevity tips. Check it out.